Brilliant. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me here today. It's really great to be able to come along for the day and to speak to you all. I'm going to be talking about how we try to collaboratively influence policy at the Nuffield Foundation. And for those of you who don't know who the Nuffield Foundation is, we are a charitable endowed trust. We're politically and financially independent, and we're guided by a really broad mission which is about advancing social well-being and educational opportunity. And we fund research. We're a grant funder, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today in terms of how we try to influence policy change and how we try to do that as part of the wider early years community. And improving policy and practice is what we do. That's kind of our mission. We want the research that we fund to make a difference to people's lives through influencing policy and practice and public understanding. So I just was going to start by sharing a couple of examples about some of the kind of research projects that we fund that you may have heard of that have been particularly impactful. One of them was the effects of Sure Start on children's outcomes, which was carried out by the Institute for Fiscal Studies and looked at the longer term effects of Sure Start and found that having access to Sure Start in early childhood led to really long-term benefits, including on children's education and their health. And IFS estimated that the long-run benefits of the programme were likely to exceed the costs. And we're yet to see the full policy impact of this research, but there's certainly been a lot of interest from central government policymakers on it. Another is the Nuffield Early Language Intervention, which has been particularly impactful on practice within primary schools and nurseries as well. It's an oral language intervention that is created and delivered by Oxed and Assessments. And at the moment, there's over 11,000 primary schools in England who are registered to deliver Nelly. So those are just a couple of examples of the kind of work that we fund. Yeah, just seeing Sally's presentation just now, it was really interesting because it kind of chimes a little bit with what I'm about to say. Yeah, as I said, our main mission as research funder is try to fund impactful research projects like the two that I've just shown. And this is kind of how we used to think it used to work, would be that we'd fund research, and then our grant holders, our researchers, would produce evidence that would be shared with policymakers. They'd make evidence-based policy, and then practice would be improved. And it was, so that's a kind of a gross oversimplification, and it actually doesn't work like that at all. And I'm not going to talk about how it really does work because, Sal's just talked to us about that. What I want to actually talk to you about is how we, as a research funder, decide what to fund and work out what our research priorities are. And this influences not only sort of the applications that we fund, but also sort of what people actually apply to us to do research about. And that's influenced by all of these different groups. Influenced by research evidence there are in particular areas, what the needs of policymakers are, and what the needs and experiences of practitioners are. And I wanted to give you a couple of examples of how we work with everyone in the sort of early years ecosystem in order to try and work out what we should be funding in order to have maximum impact. So the first example is a project we did a couple of years ago called the Changing Face of Early Childhood project, which was a synthesis project drawing together evidence about early childhood from a range of different sources. And as part of it, we identified what the research gaps were. And then in order to actually just trying to work out what we should be funding out of all this huge plethora of research gaps, we brought together practitioners, professionals, policymakers, researchers, and other funders in a workshop, basically, to try and refine which were the key research gaps that we should be directing our funding towards, and to work out which we should prioritise. And then this fed into our refreshed research priorities, which we published a blog about in 2023. And that led to a huge uptick in the amount of research applications we received on the early years. And last year, we funded a series of really policy relevant projects addressing some of the key issues that are related to the expansion of early years education and childcare to children from 9 months. And these are some of the things that are actually coming up in questions to Stephen earlier. So in terms of looking at how to support parents to take up their funded entitlements, address some of the long-standing issues of the workforce, improve quality for early years education for babies, and getting a better understanding of some of the issues that childminders are facing. So I then wanted to just briefly talk about our early years interventions work, because we funded a lot of evaluations of early years interventions. So for the past decade or so, we've been working collaboratively with other funders, particularly the Education Endowment Foundation and the Sutton Trust, to try and improve the evidence base about what we know about how to support young children's development. And in 2017, we brought together developers, program developers and evaluators to encourage them to apply to us for evaluations. And then we issued a special funding call for early years interventions and funded several projects in 2018. And lots of the projects that we funded were sort of early stage development and piloting work. And then some of these have then gone on to larger scale randomized control trials funded by the Education Endowment Foundation. And EEF have also funded a lot more evaluations in early years. And now we're in a position where we know there's a lot more evidence about what works in terms of programs to support young children's development. But in recent years, what we've realized is that where these programs are really struggling is in terms of being implemented in the often difficult situations that early years providers are facing. And that kind of really resonates with some of that messiness that Catherine was talking about earlier in relation to the intervention that she's running. So we worked with the Sutton Trust to bring together the early years sector with implementation science experts to think about how to support effective implementation approaches for programs in the early years. And this has led to us funding a couple of big implementation projects recently, one of which is the evaluation of Thrive at 5, which is being carried out by the Centre for Evidence and Implementation. And the other one is from the team here at Pedal, looking at how to implement playtime with books. And both of these programs are not only going to be producing findings that are relevant to their particular program, but also will be relevant for the early years sector more generally in terms of thinking about how to do implementation really well in early years. So those are a couple of examples of the way that we try and work as research funders as part of the wider sector, to try and fund work which has a big impact on policy and practice. And there's just one final example that I wanted to mention, which is the Early Childhood Funders Group. Now, we're a group of around 40 or so funders who work in early childhood, as well as the Nuffield Foundation. There's other funders such as Esme Fairbairn, Nesta, National Lottery, Joseph Rowntree, Sutton, Children in Need, Save the Children, etc. Initially, we were just kind of a networking group, and then we started to share information from our work that we were funding. And now we've begun to work together a lot more collaboratively to try to raise the profile of early years and to try to change the direction of policy and practice in early childhood through collaborative working and pooled funding. And at the moment, we're trying to build some infrastructure to support this strategic collaboration. So those are the examples that I wanted to share. Before I hand over to Amy, I just wanted to say, if anyone works in early years and has any views about what we should be funding, I'm around all day, so please come and find me later.